The sound of Thaddeus's tires crunching gravel as he drove away echoed in my ears, competing with the thundering of my heart. I stood frozen, my legs refusing to carry me forward or back, as if my body couldn't decide whether to chase after the man who had just abandoned me or collapse where I stood. The October air bit through my thin cardigan. I hadn't even been allowed to grab a coat before being forced into the car. Thaddeus had seemed so calm during the 40-minute drive, making small talk about the weather while I sat bewildered, thinking we were heading to a surprise birthday dinner. What a surprise it turned out to be. The half-ruined house loomed before me, a Victorian shell with peeling paint and sagging porch steps. It was the kind of place teenagers might dare each other to enter on Halloween nights, not somewhere anyone would actually live. My birthday cake and presents were still sitting on our dining room table at home, our home, where just hours ago I'd been lighting candles and wondering why my husband was acting so strangely distant. Now I knew. I finally managed to take a step forward when I heard the distinct sound of a door opening nearby. Turning, I saw a porch light flicker on at the neighboring property, casting a narrow cone of yellow across an overgrown lawn. A tall silhouette emerged, approaching cautiously. "Hello? Is someone there?" The voice was deep, with a hint of gravel that seemed strangely familiar. As the figure drew closer, a jolt of recognition shot through me that momentarily pushed aside my panic and despair. "Everett?" My voice cracked on the name I hadn't spoken aloud in nearly 15 years. He stopped a few feet away, the weak moonlight finally revealing his face. Older than I remembered, with crinkled lines around his eyes and silver threading through his dark hair, but unmistakably the same Everett Montrose who had once promised me forever when we were barely 20. "Cassandra?" Disbelief colored his voice. "Cassandra Valenti?" "Langley," I corrected automatically, then immediately felt foolish. My married name hardly mattered now, did it? Not after what Thaddeus had just done. The absurdity of the situation struck me then, abandoned by my husband only to be discovered by my first love. And a sound escaped me that was part laugh, part sob. Everett closed the distance between us, his expression shifting from surprise to concern. "What happened? Are you all right?" Before I could answer, my knees finally gave way. Everett moved quickly, catching me before I hit the ground. The warmth of human contact after the cold rejection I'd just experienced broke something open inside me, and I began to shake uncontrollably as 15 years of suppressed emotions collided with the fresh wound of abandonment. "He left me here," I managed between ragged breaths. "Thaddeus just left me here." Everett's arms tightened around me. "Come inside," he said quietly. "It's freezing out here, and you're in shock." I let him lead me toward the house with the porch light, too overwhelmed to question the bizarre coincidence that had placed my first love next door, to the place my husband had chosen for my exile. Everett's home was small but tidy, with plain furniture and walls covered in landscapes and architectural drawings. He guided me to a worn leather sofa and disappeared briefly, returning with a thick blanket that he draped over my shoulders and a glass of amber liquid that he pressed into my trembling hands. "Drink," he instructed. "It'll help with the shock." The whiskey burned down my throat, spreading warmth through my chest. I took another sip, then looked up at Everett, who was watching me with concern etched across his face. "I don't understand," I whispered. "How are you here?" He settled into an armchair across from me. "I've been renting this place for about 6 months. I'm overseeing a restoration project at St. Augustine's Cathedral in Millfield. It's a 2-year contract." He paused, studying my face. "But that's not important right now." "What happened, Cass? Why would your husband leave you at the Holloway house?" I glanced toward the window, where the silhouette of the dilapidated structure was barely visible in the darkness. The Holloway House? Is that what that place is called? Everett nodded. It's been abandoned for years. The city keeps threatening to condemn it, but there's some dispute over the ownership. His eyes narrowed. You didn't answer my question. I tried to make sense of the evening's events, but they seemed to slip through my fingers like water. It was my birthday, I said, as if that explained anything. 35 today. Thaddeus seemed fine this morning, maybe a little distracted. When he got home from work, he told me to get in the car. I thought. I laughed bitterly. I actually thought he was taking me to a surprise dinner. We drove out here, and he stopped in front of that house and told me. My voice caught. He called me an old hag. Said he was going to find someone younger. Then he just drove away. Everett's expression darkened. Just like that? After how many years? 12 years married, 15 together. I took another sip of whiskey. I thought we were happy. Or at least, content. Does he know you're afraid of the dark? Everett asked quietly. The question caught me off guard, both the content and the fact that Everett remembered such an intimate detail about me after all these years. I had always been terrified of the dark, ever since childhood. It was something I'd confessed to very few people. He knows, I confirmed, but apparently that didn't matter tonight. Everett shook his head, his jaw tight. Do you have somewhere to go? Family nearby? My parents moved to Arizona 3 years ago. My sister lives in Seattle. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders as the reality of my situation began to sink in. I don't even have my purse. My phone, my wallet, everything is at home. You can stay here tonight, Everett said without hesitation. I have a spare bedroom. In the morning, we can figure out what to do. I should have felt strange accepting help from a man I hadn't seen in 15 years, but all I felt was gratitude. Thank you. Everett stood and disappeared down the hallway, returning moments later with a t-shirt and sweatpants. These will be too big, but they should work for tonight. As I took the clothes, our fingers brushed, and a jolt of familiarity shot through me. It was surreal. Sitting in Everett's living room, after all these years, accepting borrowed clothes while my marriage imploded. Part of me wanted to ask him about his life, to fill in the 15-year gap, but exhaustion was rapidly overtaking me. The bathroom is the second door on the right, he said. Take your time. I'll make up the guest bed. In the small bathroom, I stared at my reflection. I looked shell-shocked, my eyes wide and glassy, my carefully applied birthday makeup smudged beneath them. Had Thaddeus planned this all along? Had he woken up this morning knowing he was going to abandon his wife of 12 years on her 35th birthday? I splashed cold water on my face, trying to wash away the numbness. When I emerged from the bathroom, Everett was waiting in the hallway. The guest room is ready, he said, gesturing toward an open door. If you need anything during the night, I'm just across the hall. Everett, I said, stopping him as he turned to go, why are you helping me? We haven't seen each other in 15 years, and we didn't exactly part on good terms. He was quiet for a moment. Because no one deserves to be treated the way you were tonight. Not even the woman who broke my heart. Before I could respond, he wished me good night and disappeared into his room, leaving me standing in the hallway with a lump in my throat and memories I'd spent years trying to forget, suddenly pressing against the edges of my mind. Sleep came in fitful bursts, punctuated by dreams of Thaddeus driving away and Everett emerging from shadows. I woke just after dawn, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar room until the events of the previous night came rushing back. For a few minutes, I lay still, listening to the quiet of the house and trying to process what had happened. My husband had abandoned me. I was in my ex-boyfriend's guest room. I had no phone, no money, no identification. The reality of my situation settled over me like a heavy blanket. I found Everett in the kitchen making coffee. He'd aged well, I noticed. The lines around his eyes gave him character, and the silver at his temples suited him. He'd always been handsome in a thoughtful, artistic way, so different from Thaddeus's polished corporate aesthetic. "I made coffee," he said, pushing a mug toward me, "and I found some clean towels if you want a shower." "Thank you," I said, wrapping my hands around the warm mug, "for everything. Don't thank me yet." He leaned against the counter. "We still need to figure out what to do." "I need to go home," I said. "I need to talk to Thaddeus, find out what the hell is going on." Everett nodded. "I can drive you, but first you should eat something." Over a simple breakfast of toast and eggs, I tried to make sense of my situation. I keep thinking this must be some kind of bizarre joke or midlife crisis. Thaddeus isn't impulsive. He plans everything, sometimes months in advance. This isn't like him at all. "People change," Everett said carefully, "or they show their true selves eventually." I looked up sharply. "Is that what you think happened with us?" A tense silence fell between us. 15 years of unspoken words hovering in the air. Everett sighed. "I'm sorry. That wasn't fair. I don't know your husband or your marriage." I pushed my half-eaten breakfast away. "No, you're right. Maybe I never knew him at all." As we drove toward the city, I directed Everett through the neighborhoods toward the home I'd shared with Thaddeus for the past decade. It was a stately Tudor in one of the more prestigious areas, a house that had always felt slightly too formal for my taste, but that Thaddeus had insisted projected the right image for someone of his professional standing. "This is it," I said, as Everett pulled up across the street. I felt a strange reluctance to approach my own home, as if I were an intruder rather than a resident. "Would you mind waiting?" "Just in case." "I'll be right here," he assured me. I crossed the street and walked up the familiar path to the front door. My hand was shaking as I rang the doorbell, feeling ridiculous for having to announce my arrival at my own home. When there was no response, I tried the handle and found it locked. I moved to the side of the house, checking the kitchen entrance, but it too was locked. Finally, I retrieved the spare key we kept hidden in a false rock by the garden and let myself in. The house was eerily quiet. In the dining room, my birthday cake still sat untouched on the table. The candles melted into small waxy puddles. I called Thaddeus's name, but there was no answer. Upstairs, I found the first signs that something was seriously wrong. The closet in our bedroom was half empty, Thaddeus's section cleared out, his dresser drawers hung open, emptied of their contents. In the bathroom, his toiletries were gone. With growing dread, I returned to our bedroom and checked the hiding place where we kept our important documents. The folder containing Thaddeus's passport, birth certificate, and other personal papers was missing, but mine remained. I sank onto the edge of the bed, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't an impulsive decision or a temporary breakdown. Thaddeus had planned his departure meticulously. My eyes fell on a thick envelope on the nightstand with my name written on it in Thaddeus's precise handwriting. Inside was a letter and a stack of legal documents. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter and began to read. "Cassandra, by the time you read this, I will be gone. I've been planning my departure for some time, as I'm sure is evident. I've filed for divorce. The papers are enclosed. My attorney will contact you regarding the division of assets, though I've taken the liberty of transferring funds to cover my new start. I've changed the locks, as I'll be listing the house for sale immediately. You have 3 days to remove your personal belongings. I've arranged for a moving company to assist you on Tuesday. They've been instructed to place your items in storage. The first month has been paid. I realize this seems cruel, but a clean break is best for both of us. The truth is, I've outgrown our marriage. At 35, you're entering the downward slope of your prime years. while I'm entering my peak. I deserve the chance to start fresh with someone who can match my trajectory. Goodbye, Thaddeus. I read the letter 3 times, each reading bringing a new wave of shock, hurt, and anger. The coldness of his words, the clinical way he'd planned my disposal, it was breathtaking in its cruelty. 12 years of marriage reduced to a real estate transaction and an appointment with movers. I was still sitting there, clutching the letter, when I heard a knock at the bedroom door. Everett stood in the doorway, concern etched on his face. "You were gone so long I got worried," he explained. "The front door was open." Wordlessly, I handed him the letter. His expression darkened as he read, his jaw clenching with each line. "That bastard," he muttered when he finished. "How could anyone do this to someone they've built a life with?" I laughed, a hollow sound that surprised even me. Apparently, I've started my downward slope. "Did you know 35 was the expiration date for wives?" I must have missed that fine print in the marriage contract. Everett sat beside me on the bed, close enough that I could feel his warmth, but not touching me. "What do you want to do?" It was a simple question, but I realized I had no answer. For 12 years, my life had been structured around Thaddeus, his career, his preferences, his schedule. Even my work as an interior designer had gradually been sidelined to accommodate his networking events and corporate functions. Who was I without the framework of this marriage? What did I want? "I need to pack," I said finally, focusing on the immediate task. "I have 3 days before I'm officially homeless." "You're not homeless," Everett said firmly. "You can stay with me until you figure things out." I turned to look at him, really look at him, for the first time since our reunion. Why? Why would you do that for me after how things ended between us? Everett was quiet for a moment, his eyes searching mine. "Because 15 years ago, I made a promise to always be there for you if you needed me. I may not have been able to keep all my promises, but I can keep that one." Something shifted in my chest. Not forgiveness for the past, not attraction, but a recognition of the kind of steadfastness I'd been missing in my life without even realizing it. I nodded, accepting his offer because I had no other choice, but also because part of me wanted to understand how the boy I'd once loved had become this man who seemed so different from the husband who had just discarded me. We spent the rest of the day packing my personal belongings, clothes, jewelry, books, the few mementos that were undeniably mine. Everett found boxes in the garage and helped me load them into his car. We worked mostly in silence, the weight of the situation making conversation difficult. I moved through the house like a ghost, touching furniture I'd carefully selected, artwork I'd hung, the spaces I'd crafted that now felt like they belonged to someone else. As the sun began to set, I stood in the kitchen, looking around at the home I'd never see again. There was so much of me embedded in these walls. Years of birthdays, Christmases, quiet Sunday mornings. How did one walk away from that without feeling partially erased? "Ready?" Everett asked from the doorway. I nodded, unable to speak. As we drove away, I didn't look back. Somehow, I knew that if I did, I might shatter completely, and I couldn't afford to fall apart. Not yet. Not until I understood what had happened and what I was going to do next. The first few days at Everett's cottage passed in a blur of phone calls and paperwork. I contacted my parents in Arizona, explaining the situation in the most sanitized terms I could manage. I called my sister in Seattle, who immediately offered to fly out. But I assured her I was fine. I wasn't, of course, but having her witness my humiliation seemed worse than handling it alone. I spoke to a divorce attorney recommended by a friend who promised to review the papers Thaddeus had left and advise me on next steps. Everett gave me space when I needed it, and company when the silence became too oppressive. He worked during the days, overseeing the cathedral restoration, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the unfamiliar rhythm of a house that wasn't mine. In the evenings, he cooked simple meals, and we ate together, carefully avoiding the most painful topics while gradually reacquainting ourselves with who we had become over the 15 years since our paths had diverged. I learned that Everett had established himself as a respected architectural conservationist, specializing in the restoration of historical structures. He'd traveled extensively for his work, never staying in one place for more than a few years. He'd never married, though there had been relationships. None that had stuck, he said with a shrug that suggested there was more to the story. In turn, I told him about my interior design business, which had once been promising, but had gradually taken a back seat to Thaddeus's career. I described the slow erosion of my ambitions, something I hadn't fully recognized until I was forced to articulate it aloud. I spoke of the growing distance in my marriage over the past few years, subtle shifts that I had attributed to the natural evolution of a long-term relationship rather than warning signs of imminent abandonment. I should have seen it coming, I admitted one evening as we sat on his small porch, watching the sunset. There were signs. Thaddeus started working later, traveling more. He became critical of things he used to find endearing. My laugh was too loud. My clothes were too casual. My interests were too pedestrian. "That's not on you," Everett said firmly. He was laying groundwork to justify his own choices. I sipped my wine, considering, maybe. But I also stopped seeing myself clearly. I became this appendage to his life, the perfect corporate wife. I don't even know when it happened. Everett was quiet for a moment. "Do you remember what you wanted to be when we were together?" The question caught me off guard. "A designer," which I became. "Not just a designer," he corrected. "You wanted to restore old homes. You had this vision of taking neglected places and bringing them back to life, honoring their history while making them functional for modern families." I stared at him, startled that he remembered a dream I had almost forgotten myself. I did want that, didn't I? What happened to that dream? I looked out at the darkening sky, searching for an answer. Thaddeus thought it wasn't practical. Too much investment for too little return. He encouraged me to focus on decorating new construction instead. Corporate offices, model homes, more predictable income. And you listened? He was practical. I was idealistic. It seemed reasonable at the time. Everett turned to look at me. "And now?" "Now?" I laughed softly. "Now I'm 35, divorced, and living with my ex-boyfriend. I don't think I'm in a position to chase dreams." "I disagree," Everett said. "I think you're in exactly the right position. You have no ties, no one telling you what's practical or profitable. You're free to reimagine your life however you want." I considered his words, feeling something stir inside me that I hadn't felt in years. Possibility. Before I could respond, my phone rang. It was my attorney, calling with news that would once again shift the ground beneath my feet. "Mrs. Langley, I've reviewed the financial documents provided by your husband's attorney, and I'm afraid the situation is more complicated than we initially thought," she explained. "It appears Mr. Langley has been systematically moving assets for the past 18 months. Accounts have been emptied, investments liquidated. The house has a second mortgage against it that was taken out 6 months ago. The funds are nowhere to be found." I gripped the phone tighter. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that your husband has been planning this for a long time, and he's taken measures to protect his financial interests at your expense. The assets that remain are either encumbered by debt or worth significantly less than they appear, including the business." The business? Langley Financial Consulting, the firm Thaddeus had built over the past decade, partly with my family's money. My father had invested heavily in the early years, money that had never been repaid, because Thaddeus had insisted it was better to reinvest in the company's growth. My father's investment was converted to non-voting shares 3 years ago, according to the paperwork I've found. Your husband has been very thorough in insulating himself." After the call ended, I sat in stunned silence. Everett waited patiently for me to process. "He cleaned me out," I finally said. "He's been planning this for at least 18 months, moving money, taking out loans, restructuring the business. It's all gone." "Can your lawyer fight it?" "She says we can try, but it will be expensive and time-consuming with no guarantee of success." Thaddeus covered his tracks well. He's always been meticulous about paperwork. Everett's expression darkened. "This goes beyond a midlife crisis or falling out of love. This is calculated cruelty." I nodded, a strange calm settling over me. "You know what's bizarre?" Part of me is almost relieved. At least now I know it wasn't something I did or didn't do. This was premeditated. He never intended for us to grow old together. That night, as I lay in the unfamiliar bed in Everett's spare room, I found myself thinking not about Thaddeus and his betrayal, but about the dream Everett had reminded me of, my original passion for restoring old homes. I thought about the Holloway house, the dilapidated structure where Thaddeus had left me. There had been something hauntingly beautiful about it, even in its decay. What would it take to bring a place like that back to life? And why had Thaddeus chosen that particular location to discard me? The questions followed me into sleep, where I dreamed of empty rooms waiting to be filled and doors opening onto unexpected possibilities. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. After coffee, I asked Everett if we could visit the Holloway house in daylight. "I want to see it properly," I explained. "There's something about that place that keeps pulling at me." Everett seemed surprised, but agreed. The autumn morning was crisp and clear as we walked the short distance from his cottage to the abandoned Victorian. In daylight, I could see that beneath the decay was a house with remarkable bones, intricate gingerbread trim, graceful proportions, large windows designed to capture natural light. "It's a Queen Anne," Everett explained as we stood on the overgrown lawn. "Built around 1890, the Holloway family owned it until the 1970s when the last descendant died without heirs. It's been through several owners since, but no one's lived in it for at least a decade." I moved closer, peering through a dirty window into what had once been a grand entrance hall. Why would Thaddeus bring me here? Of all the places to abandon someone, why this house? Everett shook his head. "I don't know. It seems oddly specific." I circled the house, taking in its features, mentally cataloging what would need to be repaired, replaced, restored. The practical part of my brain tallied the enormous costs such a project would entail, but another part, a part that had been dormant for too long, was captivated by the possibilities. "Do you know who owns it now?" I asked. "Last I heard, it was caught up in some kind of estate dispute. The city's buildings department has a file on it because of code violations, but no one's taken responsibility for the repairs." I stood back, taking in the full view of the house. "It deserves to be saved." "It does," Everett agreed, "but it would be an enormous undertaking." "I used to dream about undertakings like this," I said softly, before I let Thaddeus convince me that dreams were impractical. Everett studied me for a moment. "Are you thinking what I think you're thinking?" "I don't know what I'm thinking yet," I admitted, "but I'm curious." "Can you find out who owns it?" Everett's connections in the local historical preservation community proved invaluable. Within days, he had information about the Holloway house's ownership, a limited liability company called Restoration Properties, which had purchased it at a tax auction 2 years earlier, but had done nothing with it since. "I know someone who works for the county assessor," Everett explained. "She says the taxes are current, but there haven't been any permit applications or improvement plans filed. So someone's paying to maintain ownership, but not actually doing anything with the property." "Exactly. It's not unusual with these old places. Sometimes investors buy them cheap, thinking they'll flip them, then realize how much work is involved and just sit on them until the market improves or they can find another buyer." I couldn't shake my fascination with the house or the bizarre coincidence that Thaddeus had chosen it as the site of my abandonment. When I wasn't dealing with divorce paperwork or trying to salvage what I could from the financial wreckage of my marriage, I found myself researching the property's history and making lists of what it would take to restore it. 2 weeks after I moved into Everett's guest room, my attorney called with news that shifted the landscape once again. Mrs. Langley, I've been in communication with your husband's attorney regarding the division of assets. There's an unusual development I wanted to discuss with you. Mr. Langley is willing to transfer ownership of a property to you as part of the settlement. What property? The house is mortgaged to the hilt, according to you. Not your marital home. A property called the Holloway House. Do you know it? The phone nearly slipped from my hand. The Holloway House? Thaddeus owns the Holloway House? According to the documentation provided, Restoration Properties LLC is a subsidiary of Langley Financial Consulting. Your husband is offering to transfer full ownership to you, free and clear, as part of the divorce settlement. My mind raced. Why would he do that? The house is a wreck. It would cost a fortune to restore. His attorney indicated it was a gesture of goodwill, given the circumstances of your separation. I laughed bitterly. Goodwill? He abandoned me there in the middle of the night. He called me an old hag and drove off. There was an uncomfortable silence on the line. I wasn't aware of those details, Mrs. Langley. In that case, perhaps we should consider this offer more carefully. It could be some kind of trap, or a twisted form of compensation, I mused. What else is he offering? Nothing substantial. Your personal effects? A small cash settlement? The Holloway House is the only significant asset being offered. And if I refuse? We continue fighting for a fair division, but as I explained before, he's moved most of the assets out of reach. This could be a lengthy, expensive battle with no guarantee of success. After the call, I sat on Everett's porch, trying to make sense of this new development. When he returned from work, I told him about Thaddeus's offer. He owns the Holloway House? Everett repeated, his brow furrowed. Through Restoration Properties? That can't be a coincidence. None of this is coincidental, I agreed. Thaddeus doesn't do anything without a reason. But what's the reason for this? Why buy an old, dilapidated house and then abandon your wife there 2 years later? And why offer it to me in the divorce? It's like he's giving you a puzzle to solve, Everett said thoughtfully. Or setting me up for failure, I countered. The house is a money pit. Maybe he thinks I'll bankrupt myself trying to fix it. Everett considered this. Possibly. But you don't have to decide anything right away. You can have your attorney stall while we investigate further. We? I looked at him, suddenly aware of how seamlessly he'd inserted himself into my problems, offering support without hesitation. If you want my help, he amended quickly, I know a lot about historical restoration. I could at least give you an honest assessment of what you'd be getting into. The following Saturday, Everett arranged for a contractor friend named Miles to meet us at the Holloway House. Miles was a specialist in historical renovations with a gruff manner and a keen eye for structural issues. Foundations solid, he announced after inspecting the basement. That's something at least. Roof's another story. You've got water damage in at least 3 upstairs rooms. Electrical's ancient, needs a complete rewiring. Plumbing's a nightmare waiting to happen. For the next 2 hours, Miles walked us through the house, pointing out problems and potential. The news wasn't all bad. The hardwood floors were salvageable under layers of linoleum and carpet. The original trim and moldings were largely intact. Many of the windows could be restored rather than replaced. Ballpark figure? I asked when we stood once again in the entrance hall. Miles scratched his beard. Minimum $200,000 to make it habitable. Double that if you want to do a proper historical restoration, and that's assuming you do some of the work yourself. I nodded, not surprised by the figures, but still daunted by them. Even if I accepted Thaddeus's offer, I didn't have that kind of money, especially after the financial devastation he'd engineered. "Thanks for your time, Miles," Everett said, clapping his friend on the shoulder. "No problem. Hey, if you decide to go forward with this, give me a call. Not many people tackle projects like this anymore. It'd be nice to see this old girl brought back to life." After Miles left, Everett and I wandered through the house again, this time more slowly, absorbing its character and possibilities. "I can see why you're drawn to it," Everett said, as we stood in what had once been a grand parlor. "Despite everything, it has good energy. It just needs someone to care about it again." "Like me," I said softly. Everett turned to look at me. "Are you considering accepting Thaddeus's offer?" "I'm tempted," I admitted, "but it makes no financial sense. I don't have the resources to restore it. And even if I did, why would I want to tie myself to a place associated with the worst night of my life?" "Maybe that's exactly why you should consider it," Everett suggested. "You could transform it from a place of rejection into something beautiful." "A reclamation?" His words resonated with something deep inside me. A reclamation, not just of the house, but of the dreams and ambitions I'd abandoned for Thaddeus's vision of who I should be. "Even if I wanted to, how would I finance it?" "Thaddeus left me with almost nothing." Everett was quiet for a moment, then said, "There might be grants available for historical preservation, and banks sometimes offer special loans for restoration projects, especially if the property has historical significance." "Which this one does." He nodded. The Holloway family was prominent in the area's development. The house is eligible for the National Register of Historic Places, which could open up tax incentives and grant opportunities. I walked to one of the tall windows, watching dust motes dance in the sunlight streaming through the dirty glass. I'd need to live somewhere while the restoration was happening. I can't impose on you indefinitely. "You're not imposing," Everett said quickly. "Stay as long as you need to. And there's another option. You could make one section of the house habitable first, then live there while you work on the rest. It's what a lot of restorers do." I turned to face him, suddenly curious about his investment in this idea. "Why are you encouraging me to do this?" Everett leaned against the ornate fireplace mantel, his expression thoughtful. "Because when you talk about this house, you light up in a way I haven't seen since I've known you again. And because I think Thaddeus took something from you that was more valuable than money. He took your belief in your own vision. This could be your chance to reclaim that." 3 days later, I instructed my attorney to accept Thaddeus's offer of the Holloway house, with the condition that all liens, taxes, and other encumbrances be cleared before transfer. To my surprise, Thaddeus agreed immediately. Within a week, I was the owner of a dilapidated Victorian mansion that most would consider a liability rather than an asset. I still had no idea why Thaddeus had chosen this particular property as the site of my abandonment, or why he was so willing to sign it over to me. But as I stood on the weed-choked lawn, holding the keys that Miles had helped me change, I felt a strange sense of rightness, as if the house and I recognized something in each other. Both of us discarded but still standing, both with untapped potential beneath the damage. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello?" "Cassandra." Thaddeus's voice, smooth and controlled as ever, sent a chill through me. It was the first time I'd heard it since the night he'd driven away, leaving me alone in the dark. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "I see you accepted my offer." "Yes, though I'm curious why you made it." He chuckled, a sound that once would have warmed me, but now felt like ice down my spine. "Let's call it a parting gift. A fixer-upper for the woman who always wanted to fix things. You never supported my restoration dreams, I said. You always said they were impractical. For me, they were. I need someone who's looking toward the future, not obsessed with preserving the past. But, for you, this seems fitting. A broken house for a dash dash. If you call me broken, Thaddeus, I swear I'll... Easy, Cassandra. I was going to say, for a woman in transition, though your defensiveness is telling. I took a deep breath, refusing to let him bait me. Why that house? Why abandon me there specifically? There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his tone had shifted, becoming almost reflective. Do you remember our first anniversary? We were driving back from dinner, and you made me stop the car so you could look at that house. You said it had good bones and deserved to be loved again. You talked about it for weeks afterward, researching its history, sketching renovation plans. Then you just stopped, like you stopped talking about so many things that used to excite you. I remembered that night, though I was surprised he did. I had been captivated by the Holloway house even then, seeing past its deterioration to its inherent beauty and possibility. So this is what? Some twisted gift? Abandoning me at a house I once admired? I'm giving you what you really wanted, Cassandra. A project, a purpose, something to pour yourself into now that you don't have me. You make it sound almost noble, Thaddeus. But we both know you orchestrated a complete financial dismantling before you left. This house is worth nothing compared to what you took. Value is relative, he replied smoothly. Anyway, I've done my part. The house is yours, free and clear. What you do with it is your business. Why call me now? Just to gloat? There was a pause before he answered. I wanted to hear your voice one last time. I'm leaving the country tomorrow. London first, then possibly Singapore. My new position offers significant international opportunities. With your new, younger model by your side, I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. Alicia is 26, Harvard Business School graduate, and ambitious in ways you never were. We're compatible. The casual cruelty of his words stung, but less than they might have weeks earlier. I hope you'll be very happy together. We will be. Goodbye, Cassandra. Enjoy your house. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, processing the conversation. So many questions remained unanswered, but one thing was clear. Thaddeus saw the Holloway house as some sort of consolation prize, a distraction for the wife he no longer wanted. What he didn't understand was that in giving me this house, he might have inadvertently given me back something more valuable, a connection to the woman I'd been before I molded myself to fit his expectations. That evening, I shared the details of Thaddeus's call with Everett as we sat on his porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. He thinks he's punishing you, Everett said, shaking his head, giving you a burden disguised as a gift. Maybe he is, I admitted. This house could be my financial ruin. It will take every penny I have and then some. Or it could be your rebirth. Your reclamation. I smiled at his use of the word again. You seem very invested in this reclamation idea. Everett was quiet for a moment, swirling the wine in his glass. I knew you before, he said finally, before Thaddeus. Before you started disappearing into someone else's vision of who you should be. I remember how passionate you were about architectural restoration, how your face would light up when you talked about bringing old buildings back to life. Watching you reconnect with that passion has been remarkable. His words warmed me in a way I hadn't expected. For so long, I'd viewed our past relationship through the lens of its painful ending. I'd forgotten the good parts, how Everett had always supported my dreams, how he'd seen me clearly in ways that Thaddeus never had. I've been thinking about what Miles said, I ventured, about making one part of the house habitable first. The kitchen and a bedroom upstairs might not be too difficult to renovate. The plumbing needs work, but it's not impossible. You're serious about living there? I nodded. I can't stay with you forever, Everett. And financially, it makes the most sense. If I'm going to invest in restoring the house, I should live there and avoid paying rent elsewhere. I understand the practicality, but isn't it a bit emotionally complicated? Living in the place where Thaddeus abandoned you? Maybe that's exactly why I need to do it, I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. It's like you said, reclamation, taking back power, transforming something painful into something beautiful. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Miles helped me prioritize repairs, focusing first on making a small section of the house livable. We tackled the kitchen and one upstairs bedroom, updating the electrical and plumbing systems in those areas while leaving the rest for later phases. Everett connected me with the local historical society, which provided valuable information about the house's original features and offered to sponsor my application for the National Register. He introduced me to preservation specialists who advised on appropriate restoration techniques and materials. My parents, initially horrified by my plans to live in a partially renovated house, eventually came around enough to send a modest financial contribution toward the repairs. My sister flew out for a weekend, helping me strip wallpaper and sand floors, filling the echoing rooms with laughter and encouragement. As the work progressed, I began to feel a shift inside myself, a reconnection to the passionate, ambitious woman I'd been before marriage had smoothed my edges and dimmed my light. Each uncovered piece of original woodwork, each repaired window, each careful restoration choice felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been buried under years of compromise. 2 months after accepting ownership of the Holloway house, I moved in. The kitchen was functional, if not beautiful, with temporary countertops and basic appliances. The upstairs bedroom had been painted a soft blue, with refinished hardwood floors and large windows that filled the space with light. The bathroom was simple but clean, with a claw foot tub I'd found at an architectural salvage yard and painstakingly restored. The rest of the house remained a work in progress, walls stripped to the studs in some areas, original details carefully protected with plastic sheeting, tools and materials stacked in what would eventually become formal living spaces. But even in its partially dismantled state, the house felt alive in a way it hadn't when I first stood before it on that October night. Everett helped me move my meager belongings from his cottage to the Holloway house, carrying boxes up the stairs and assembling the simple bed frame I'd purchased. As we stood in the nearly empty bedroom, surrounded by the few possessions I'd managed to salvage from my former life, I felt an unexpected wave of emotion. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick, "for everything. I wouldn't be here if not for you." Everett shook his head. "You would have found your way. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for. Maybe, but having someone believe in me made it easier." I hesitated, then added, "I've been so focused on the logistics of this move that I haven't properly expressed how grateful I am for your friendship these past months. Is that what we are?" "Friends?" There was something in his tone I couldn't quite decipher. "Aren't we?" I asked cautiously. He looked away, his gaze moving to the window where the last light of day was fading. "I should go. It's getting late, and you must be tired." I watched him head for the stairs, feeling an odd tension between us that hadn't been there before. "Everett," he paused, one hand on the railing. "Yes? Will you come back tomorrow?" There's still so much to do, and I could use the help and the company. He smiled then, the tension easing from his shoulders. "I'll be here." After he left, I walked through the quiet house, listening to its creaks and settling noises, familiarizing myself with its rhythms. In the fading light, I made my way to what had once been the formal parlor, now stripped down to its architectural bones. I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by potential, and felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. This was my house now, my project, my future. For the first time since the dais had abandoned me here, I felt truly grateful for his parting gift. In trying to discard me, he had inadvertently set me free. The first night in the Holloway house was both exhilarating and terrifying. As darkness fell, the unfamiliar creaks and groans of the old structure seemed amplified in the emptiness. My childhood fear of the dark, the one Everett had remembered when Thaddeus had not, threatened to overwhelm me as shadows gathered in corners and strange sounds echoed through the partially renovated rooms. I reminded myself that this was my home now, that each mysterious noise was simply the house settling, adjusting to my presence as I was adjusting to its. Still, I slept with lights on in the hallway and bathroom, their glow offering comfort against the pressing darkness. Morning brought renewed energy and determination. Everett arrived early, as promised, carrying coffee and pastries from a local bakery. "How was your first night?" he asked, setting the breakfast on the makeshift kitchen island, an old door balanced on sawhorses. "Educational," I said wryly. "I learned that this house has remarkable range of creaks and moans, and that the bedroom door sticks when it's humid. All part of the charm of old houses." He handed me a coffee. "What's on the agenda for today?" We spent the day tackling the dining room, carefully removing layers of wallpaper to reveal the original plaster beneath. It was painstaking work, requiring patience and attention to detail. Exactly the kind of project that Thaddeus would have dismissed as impractical, but that I found deeply satisfying. As we worked side by side, conversation flowed easily between us. We talked about Everett's current restoration project at the cathedral, about books we'd read, about memories from our college days that didn't touch on the painful end of our relationship. It felt comfortable, this rediscovered friendship, though sometimes I caught him watching me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. "Tell me about the past 15 years, I said as we broke for lunch, sitting on the porch steps with sandwiches Everett had brought, the highlight reel version. He considered this, taking a bite of his sandwich. After things ended, I threw myself into my work, got my master's in architectural conservation, then traveled wherever the projects took me. Boston, Charleston, New Orleans, San Francisco. I spent 3 years in Europe, mostly Italy and France. Came back to the States about 5 years ago. Been moving from project to project ever since. Sounds exciting," he shrugged. "It was, in some ways. I've worked on amazing buildings, met fascinating people, but it's been rootless too. Always the newcomer, always temporary." "No serious relationships?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "A few. Nothing that lasted." He glanced at me. "The longest was with a museum curator in Boston. Caroline. We were together for almost 3 years. She wanted to settle down, have a family. I wasn't ready." "Why not?" Everett was quiet for a long moment. I told myself it was about my career, the travel, the uncertainty. But looking back, I think part of me was still unresolved about the past. The air between us shifted, charged with unspoken history. I looked away, focusing on the overgrown garden that stretched from the porch to the street. Another project for another day. "What about you?" Everett asked. "Before Thaddeus, after we ended." "I was a mess for a while," I admitted. "Finished my degree, worked for a design firm in Chicago. Dated casually, but nothing serious. Then I met Thaddeus at a charity event. He was charming, stable, successful. Everything seemed easy with him, at least in the beginning. When did it change?" I considered the question. It was gradual. Looking back, I can see the pattern, small compromises that became bigger ones. By the time I realized how much I'd given up, it felt too late to reclaim it. I'd invested so many years in being Thaddeus's wife that I didn't know who I was without that identity. And now, I smiled, gesturing to the house behind us. Now, I'm finding out. It's scary and exhilarating and sometimes overwhelming, but it feels right, you know? Like I'm finally becoming who I was meant to be all along. The days fell into a rhythm as autumn deepened toward winter. I worked on the house during the week, tackling projects I could manage alone and coordinating with contractors for the more technical aspects. Everett came by on weekends, helping with whatever needed doing, installing insulation, repairing window frames, stripping paint from original woodwork. We carefully avoided discussing our shared past or defining whatever was growing between us in the present. It was easier to focus on the tangible work of restoration, on the gradual transformation of the Holloway house from abandoned ruin to emerging home. One Sunday afternoon in early December, we were working in what would eventually be the library, carefully removing damaged plaster to expose the brick chimney behind it. As I reached up to chip away a stubborn section, my foot slipped on the ladder, sending me tumbling backward. Everett moved quickly, catching me before I hit the ground. For a moment, we froze. His arms around me, my back pressed against his chest, both of us breathing heavily from the near accident. I could feel his heart racing, matching the sudden acceleration of my own. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice rougher than usual. "Yes," I managed. "Thanks to you." Neither of us moved. The contact was both familiar and strange, like a memory made physical. After 15 years, Everett's arms still felt like a place I knew, a safe harbor I'd once taken for granted. "Cassandra," he began, but was interrupted by a sharp knock at the front door. We broke apart, the moment shattered. I smoothed my hair, inexplicably flustered. "I'll get it." I opened the door to find a woman in her early 30s, standing on my porch. She was impeccably dressed in a camel coat and cashmere scarf, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. Everything about her screamed polished, professional, purposeful. "Cassandra Langley?" she asked, her tone crisp. "Yes, can I help you?" "I'm Alicia Reeves." She extended a manicured hand. "Thaddeus's fiancée." The shock must have shown on my face because she smiled, not unkindly. "I'm sorry to drop in unannounced, but I need to speak with you about a matter of some importance." I stood frozen, unable to process the appearance of the woman Thaddeus had left me for, the 26-year-old Harvard graduate who was ambitious in ways I never was. She looked exactly as I'd imagined her, young, beautiful, confident. Everything I apparently was not at the advanced age of 35. "Cass? Who is it?" Everett appeared behind me, his hand coming to rest protectively on my shoulder. "This is Alicia Reeves," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Thaddeus's fiancée." Everett's hand tightened slightly on my shoulder. "What's she doing here?" Alicia glanced between us, her expression neutral. "As I was explaining to Mrs. Langley, I need to discuss something important." "May I come in?" I stepped back automatically, allowing her to enter. She looked around the partially renovated entryway, her eyes taking in the exposed beams, the half-stripped walls, the tools and materials scattered about. "You're actually restoring it," she said, sounding genuinely surprised. "What did you expect me to do with it?" I asked, finding my voice at last. She shrugged elegantly. "Sell it, I suppose. That's what Thaddeus thought you would do. He didn't think you had it in you to tackle a project of this magnitude." The casual dismissal in her tone was so reminiscent of Thaddeus that I almost laughed. Then he doesn't know me as well as he thought. "What is it you wanted to discuss, Miss Reeves?" She hesitated, glancing at Everett. It's a private matter. Anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of Everett, I said firmly. Alicia pursed her lips but nodded. Very well. I'll be direct. Thaddeus made a mistake in giving you this property. There's something here that belongs to him, to us, and we need it back. I exchanged a confused look with Everett. I don't understand. When Thaddeus purchased this property 2 years ago, it was with a specific purpose in mind. The previous owners had discovered something of significant value hidden within the house, but died before they could retrieve it. Thaddeus acquired the property with the intention of finding it. Finding what? Everett asked, his tone skeptical. Alicia's professional demeanor cracked slightly, revealing a flash of irritation. I'm not at liberty, to discuss the specifics. What matters is that Thaddeus has realized his error in transferring ownership to you before completing his search. He's prepared to offer you fair compensation for the return of the property. I stared at her, incredulous. He abandoned me here in the middle of the night, called me an old hag, and drove away. Then he orchestrated a financial dismantling that left me with almost nothing. And now he wants the house back because there's something valuable hidden here that he forgot about? Alicia had the grace to look uncomfortable. The circumstances of your separation are regrettable, but irrelevant to the current situation. Thaddeus is prepared to offer you $200,000 for the immediate return of the property. That's significantly more than its market value in its current condition. The amount was exactly what Miles had estimated it would cost to make the house fully habitable, a coincidence that seemed too precise to be accidental. Had Thaddeus been monitoring my progress somehow? Tell Thaddeus thank you for the offer, but I'm not interested in selling, I said firmly. This is my home now. Alicia's expression hardened. I understand this is unexpected, but I urge you to consider carefully. Thaddeus's offer is generous and time-limited. Time-limited? Everett repeated. That sounds like a threat. Not at all, Alicia said smoothly. Merely a reflection of our timeline. Thaddeus and I are relocating permanently to London in 6 weeks. We'd like to resolve this matter before our departure. The matter is resolved, I said. The house is mine, legally and permanently. Whatever Thaddeus thinks is hidden here, he should have thought of that before he signed over the deed. Alicia reached into her handbag and removed a business card, which she placed on a nearby stack of lumber. My contact information. Please call if you reconsider. The offer stands for 1 week. After she left, Everett and I stared at each other in bewildered silence. What the hell was that about? He finally asked. I have no idea, I admitted. Thaddeus never mentioned anything about something valuable hidden in the house. Do you believe her? I considered the question. I don't know. Thaddeus isn't impulsive or careless. If he bought this house for a specific purpose, then gave it to me without achieving that purpose, there must be a reason. Unless he's playing some kind of game, Everett suggested. Maybe there's nothing hidden here at all. Maybe this is just another way to manipulate you. Possibly. But why? What would he gain? Control? The satisfaction of disrupting your life again, just as you're finding your footing? I walked to the window, watching Alicia's sleek BMW pull away from the curb. Whatever his motivation, I'm not selling. This house is mine now, and I'm not letting it go. Everett moved to stand beside me. Good. But maybe we should try to figure out what he thinks is here, just in case it's something you should know about. That night, after Everett went home, I found myself restless and unsettled. Alicia's visit had stirred up emotions I thought I'd begun to process. Anger at Thaddeus's manipulation, humiliation at being so easily discarded, fear that somehow he would find a way to hurt me again. Unable to sleep, I decided to research the house's history more thoroughly, hoping to find clues about what might be hidden within its walls. I set up my laptop on the kitchen island and began searching archives of local newspapers and historical records. The Holloway family had been prominent in the late 19th century, with interests in banking and real estate. The house had been built by Abraham Holloway, a banker who'd made his fortune during the railroad expansion. After his death in 1912, his son Edward had inherited the property, followed by Edward's daughter Margaret, who had lived there until her death in 1976. With no direct heirs, the house had been sold to a developer who'd converted it into apartments in the early 1980s. The conversion had been poorly executed, damaging many of the original features. The property had changed hands several times over the subsequent decades, gradually falling into disrepair as maintenance costs exceeded rental income. According to county records, the last owners before Restoration Properties had been an elderly couple named Harold and Eleanor Winters, who'd purchased it in 2007 with plans to restore it to a single-family home. Harold had died in 2018, and Eleanor had followed 6 months later, leaving the property in probate until the tax auction where Thaddeus's company had acquired it. Nothing in the official record suggested anything unusual or valuable hidden within the house. But as I was about to close my laptop, a small news item from 2017 caught my attention. It was a brief profile of the Winters couple, featuring their restoration efforts at the Holloway house. The article mentioned that during renovations, they had discovered a historical treasure of significant local interest behind a wall in the library, exactly where Everett and I had been working that afternoon. The article didn't specify what the treasure was, only that the Winters planned to donate it to the local historical society once restoration was complete. A follow-up search yielded nothing further, no record of any donation to the Historical Society, no mention of the treasure in Harold or Eleanor's obituaries. What had they found? And why had it interested Thaddeus enough to purchase the property after their deaths? The next morning, I called Everett to share what I'd discovered. "The library," he said thoughtfully. "That makes sense. It's one of the few rooms where the original walls are still intact. Most of the other spaces have been altered over the years. But what could be valuable enough to make Thaddeus offer $200,000 to get it back? I don't know, but I think we should focus our restoration efforts on that room for now. If there's something hidden there, we might find it before Alicia's deadline expires." Everett came over that afternoon, and we began a systematic exploration of the library walls. We removed the remaining damaged plaster around the chimney, examined the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that lined two walls, and checked for any signs of hidden compartments or unusual construction. "If I were hiding something valuable in a 19th century house," Everett said as we worked, "I'd use one of the standard hiding places from that era. False bottom in a drawer, hollow space behind a mantel, concealed compartment in a built-in." "The Winters found something behind a wall," I reminded him. "That suggests something more substantial than a small hiding place." We continued our search for 3 days, growing increasingly frustrated as each investigation yielded nothing. On the 4th day, as I was carefully removing a section of crown molding that had been damaged by water, I noticed something unusual, a seam in the plaster that didn't follow the standard construction pattern. "Everett, look at this," I called, pointing to the faint line that ran vertically from ceiling to floor, then horizontally about 4 feet up. "This isn't normal settling or damage. It's too regular." He examined the seam closely, then tapped gently along its length. About halfway up, the sound changed subtly, from the solid thud of plaster over lath to a slightly hollow resonance. "There's something here," he said, excitement creeping into his voice. "A cavity or compartment of some kind." Working carefully, we chipped away the plaster along the seam, revealing the edge of what appeared to be a small door built into the wall. It was about 2 feet square, constructed of the same oak as the library paneling, and nearly invisible when closed. "A priest hole," Everett said, his voice filled with wonder. Or something similar. Secret compartments like this were sometimes built into houses during the Victorian era, not for hiding priests, as in the original English version, but for valuable documents or possessions. With trembling hands, I eased the small door open. Inside was a shallow compartment lined with faded red velvet. And there, nestled in the center, was a leather-bound book and a small metal box. I carefully removed the items, setting them on a drop cloth we'd spread on the floor. The book was an old ledger, its pages yellowed with age. The metal box was made of tarnished silver, about the size of a thick paperback novel, with an ornate monogram engraved on the lid. A.H. for Abraham Holloway. Should we open it? I asked, suddenly hesitant. Everett looked at me. It's your house, Cass. Your decision. I took a deep breath and lifted the lid of the silver box. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, was a stack of papers, old handwritten documents that appeared to be letters or legal papers of some kind. On top of the stack was a folded sheet of newer paper, a modern note that seemed out of place among the historical documents. I unfolded this first. It was dated 2017 and signed by Eleanor Winters. To whoever finds this treasure, these documents reveal the truth about the founding of Millfield and the Holloway family's role in it. They contain evidence that Abraham Holloway acquired his fortune through fraud and manipulation, forcing the rightful owners of the land, the Kensington family, into financial ruin. My husband and I intended to donate these papers to the Historical Society to correct the record, but certain interested parties have made threats against us if we proceed. We return these documents to their hiding place in the hope that someone braver or more powerful than ourselves will eventually bring the truth to light. Eleanor Winters. Everett and I looked at each other, the implications slowly dawning. Thaddeus is a Holloway descendant, I whispered, the pieces suddenly fitting together. That's why he bought this house when it came up for auction. That's why he's so desperate to get these documents back. How do you know he's related to the Holloways? Everett asked. His mother's maiden name was Holloway, Elizabeth Holloway. He mentioned once that his family had deep roots in Millfield, though he never elaborated. I began examining the other documents in the box, my heart racing. These are land deeds, banking records, personal correspondence. They show how Abraham Holloway systematically destroyed the Kensington family through fraud and possibly blackmail. If these became public, Everett said slowly, it could significantly alter the historical narrative about one of Millfield's founding families, and potentially affect the Holloway Foundation, I added. Thaddeus sits on the board. They fund half the cultural institutions in the city. The Holloway Foundation had been established by Thaddeus's grandfather, using family money to support arts and education throughout the region. Its prestige and influence were considerable, and would undoubtedly be damaged if their founder's fortune was revealed to have been built on fraud. That explains why he's willing to pay $200,000 to get these documents back, Everett said. It's a small price to protect the family legacy. I sat back on my heels, processing the revelation. No wonder he was so furious when he realized he'd given me the house without retrieving these first. He must have been searching for them, but couldn't find them before our marriage fell apart. And now he's desperate to get them back before you discover them and potentially use them against him. I looked down at the documents in my hands, the proof of a historical injustice, a secret Thaddeus had been willing to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to protect. What was I going to do with this unexpected power? The week of Alicia's deadline passed without any communication from her or Thaddeus. I kept the documents in a safe deposit box at my bank, telling no one but Everett about their existence while I considered my options. Part of me wanted to expose the truth immediately, to strike back at Thaddeus in the most damaging way possible after all he'd done to me. But another part, the part that had been gradually healing and reclaiming my own strength. Questioned whether revenge would bring any real satisfaction. What would justice look like in this situation? Everett asked one evening as we sat on my porch, watching snow begin to fall. Not for Thaddeus, but for the historical record and for the Kensington descendants, if there are any. It was a good question, one I'd been pondering for days. I think the documents should be made public eventually, I said. The historical record should be accurate. But I also think it's worth trying to find out if there are any Kensington descendants who deserve to know this story first before it becomes a public scandal. Everett nodded. That's thoughtful. Measured. Not about revenge, but about setting things right. Is that surprising? I asked, studying his face in the fading light. No, he said softly. It's exactly the kind of person you've always been. Compassionate, considering all sides. It's one of the things I've always loved about you. The word loved hung in the air between us. Present tense, not past. Neither of us acknowledged it directly, but something shifted in that moment, a door opening between us that had been closed for 15 years. Over the following weeks, I worked with a genealogist to trace the Kensington family line. To my surprise, there were living descendants, a brother and sister in their 60s who lived just 2 hours away. After careful consideration, I reached out to them, explaining what I had found and offering to share the documents that revealed their family's history. Margaret and Thomas Kensington were understandably skeptical at first, but agreed to meet with me at a neutral location. When I showed them the documents and explained how I'd come to possess them, their initial suspicion gave way to emotion as they realized they were looking at evidence of a historical wrong that had altered their family's trajectory. Our grandfather always said we should have been one of the founding families of Millfield, Thomas said, his voice thick. But there was never any proof, just family stories that sounded like sour grapes. What will you do with these documents? Margaret asked me. That's partly why I wanted to meet with you, I explained. I believe they should eventually become part of the historical record, but I wanted you to have a voice in how and when that happens. They exchanged a look, something unspoken passing between them. We'd like some time to process this, Margaret said finally, to discuss it as a family and consider our options. Of course, I agreed. Take all the time you need. As winter deepened, work on the Holloway house continued. The library was fully restored by January, its hidden compartment carefully preserved as a historical feature. The dining room and front parlor followed, their original details painstakingly brought back to life. What had begun as a project of necessity was becoming a labor of love, a restoration not just of a historic home, but of my own sense of purpose and identity. Everett remained a constant presence, offering expertise and support, though something tentative had developed between us since that evening on the porch. We circled each other carefully, neither willing to risk the friendship we'd rebuilt by acknowledging the growing attraction that simmered beneath the surface. In February, I received a call from Margaret Kensington. She and her brother had made a decision about the Holloway documents. We want to donate them to the Historical Society, she explained, but with a condition that they're used to create an educational exhibit about the true history of Millfield's founding, including both the Holloway and Kensington stories. Not to vilify anyone, but to present a more complete picture of our shared past. It was a gracious decision, focused on truth and reconciliation rather than retribution. I agreed to help facilitate the donation and to attend the opening of the exhibit when it was ready. 2 days later, Thaddeus called. His number on my caller ID sent a jolt of anxiety through me, but when I answered, his voice was not angry or threatening as I'd expected, but resigned. The Kensingtons reached out to me, he said without preamble. They told me about your decision to donate the documents to the Historical Society. I held my breath, waiting for the explosion of rage or manipulative tactics I'd grown accustomed to during our marriage. Instead, there was a long silence before he spoke again. "It was well played, Cassandra. I underestimated you." "This isn't a game, Thaddeus," I replied. "It's about doing the right thing." He sighed. "The right thing is subjective. My family has done tremendous good through the Holloway Foundation. Does that count for nothing against actions taken over a century ago?" "I'm not saying your family hasn't done good work. But history shouldn't be sanitized to protect reputations. The Kensingtons deserve to have their story told too." Another silence, then. "I offered you $200,000 for those documents." "I know, but some things aren't about money." "Everything is about money, Cassandra. You're just choosing a different currency. Moral superiority, perhaps." His cynicism didn't sting as it once would have. "Think what you want, Thaddeus. The documents are going to the Historical Society. The Kensingtons are being remarkably gracious about it, focusing on education rather than blame. You might consider following their example." "Always the idealist," he said, but the usual derision was missing from his tone. "Goodbye, Cassandra." "Goodbye, Thaddeus." It was the last time we spoke. The Historical Society announced the Holloway Kensington exhibit in March, generating significant local interest. Thaddeus and Alicia left for London as planned, making no further attempts to interfere with the donation or the exhibit. The Holloway Foundation, perhaps sensing the shifting winds, announced a new scholarship program for disadvantaged youth. Named in honor of the diverse founding families of Mill Field. As spring arrived, the Holloway house, my house, bloomed with new life. The gardens I'd begun restoring burst with early flowers. The freshly painted exterior gleamed in the sunlight, and the interior renovations had transformed nearly half the rooms from dilapidated shells to gracious living spaces that honored their history while embracing modern comfort. One Saturday in April, as Everett and I worked on restoring the original stained glass window in the stairwell, he suddenly set down his tools and turned to face me. "Cassandra," he said, his voice serious, "there's something I need to say." I carefully placed my own tools on the drop cloth, my heart racing at his tone. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "I've been helping you restore this house for 6 months, spending nearly every weekend here, having dinner with you most nights, talking until midnight about everything under the sun. And all this time, I've been avoiding saying what's been obvious to me since the night Thaddeus left you here. Which is," my voice was barely above a whisper, "I never stopped loving you. Not really. I tried. God knows I tried. But when I opened my door that night and saw you standing there, it was like the 15 years between us collapsed. Everything I felt for you then, I still feel now. More even. Because now I know who you are as a woman, not just as the girl I loved in college." I stared at him, overwhelmed by his words and the emotions they stirred in me. "Everett, you don't have to say anything," he continued quickly. "I know your life has been turned upside down this year. I know you're still healing from what Thaddeus did. The last thing I want is to pressure you or complicate things. But I couldn't keep pretending that we're just friends or that I'm helping you with this house out of some kind of altruistic neighborliness." I looked around at the house we'd been restoring together, at the tangible evidence of care and commitment in every repaired window frame, every carefully preserved piece of molding, every decision made with an eye toward honoring the past while creating something sustainable for the future. And suddenly, I understood the deeper restoration that had been happening all along, not just of the Holloway house, but of my trust, my confidence, my belief in the possibility of genuine partnership. Everett had been steadfastly present through the most difficult months of my life, offering support without taking over, giving advice without controlling, seeing me clearly without imposing his own vision of who I should be. It wasn't a coincidence, was it? I asked softly. You living next door to this house when Thaddeus abandoned me here? Everett looked confused. What do you mean? I've been wondering for months why Thaddeus would choose this specific location to leave me. A house I'd once admired, yes, but also one right next to where my first love happened to be living. It seemed too perfect, too deliberately cruel. Understanding dawned on his face. You think Thaddeus knew I was living here? That he chose this spot specifically because of our history? I nodded. It makes sense, doesn't it? His final act of cruelty, not just abandoning me, but doing it in a way that would force me to confront the path not taken, to wonder what might have been if I'd chosen differently 15 years ago. But how would he even know I was here? We haven't spoken since college. I kept a box of memorabilia from our relationship, I admitted. Photos, letters, ticket stubs. I found it missing after Thaddeus left. He must have gone through it, maybe seen something that led him to you. An alumni newsletter mention of your restoration project, perhaps. Everett looked stunned. If that's true, then he orchestrated this entire scenario, leaving you at the Holloway house, knowing I lived next door, probably assuming I'd help you, forcing you to face your past at the same moment he was destroying your present. It would be just like him, I said. Meticulous, controlling, leaving nothing to chance. The ultimate power play, setting up a situation where I'd be confronted with what might have been while simultaneously being rejected by what is. But why would he want that? What would he gain? Control, I said simply, or the illusion of it. He couldn't control my reaction to his abandonment, but he could control the circumstances, set the stage, manipulate the players. Everett shook his head, processing this new perspective. If that's true, then this, us, it's exactly what he wanted to happen. He wanted me to fall in love with you again, wanted you to see the contrast between how he treated you and how I would treat you. No, I corrected gently. He wanted me to see the contrast but be unable to act on it. He wanted me broken, humiliated, filled with regret. What he didn't count on was my resilience or your steadfastness. I moved closer to Everett, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his green eyes, the subtle lines that 15 years had etched around them. Thaddeus thought he was punishing me by leaving me at the doorstep of a broken house with my first love nearby, a cruel reminder of all I'd lost. But what he actually did was give me exactly what I needed to rebuild my life. A house that needed restoration, yes, but also a connection to the woman I was before I lost myself in his expectations. And me? Everett asked softly. Was I part of what you needed? I reached out, laying my palm against his cheek. You were essential. Not because you rescued me that night, but because you've been beside me every step of the way since, supporting without controlling, believing in me even when I didn't believe in myself. I do believe in you, he said, covering my hand with his own. I always have. I know. That's the irony of Thaddeus's grand manipulation. In trying to break me completely, he inadvertently gave me back everything I'd lost. My passion for restoration, my professional confidence, and you. The perfect punishment became the perfect gift. Everett smiled, a slow, warm smile that reached his eyes. So what happens now? I glanced around at the half-restored stained glass window, at the tools we'd set aside, at the house that had become both my refuge and my purpose. Now we finish what we started. Together. As his lips met mine, for the first time in 15 years, I felt the final pieces of my own restoration falling into place. Thaddeus had abandoned me at the Holloway house thinking it would be my ending. Instead, it had become my beginning, a reclamation not just of an old house with good bones, but of the woman I was always meant to be. The woman who had always been there, waiting to be uncovered, like a hidden treasure behind a forgotten wall.